you so much for joining me here on my channel. If you haven't subscribed, then the button is somewhere down here. Then I would love for you to do that, and you'll be able to see all my new classes as they come out each week. Today we're going to work a bit on a pose that if you have ever done a yoga class, you will surely have come across, which is downward facing dog. It's a pose you're going to see again and again. You may have heard it called by its Sanskrit name, which is 𝚊𝚗𝚍𝚗𝚐𝚘𝚠𝚗𝚍. This is a pose that it serves a bit as a reset. So often as we're flowing through a sequence, we're going to come to downward facing dog and take a few deep breaths while we're there. I used to get frustrated when I first started yoga because it was often referred to as a resting pose, and I personally at that time did not find it very restful at all because it took quite a bit of strength to stay up in the pose. It's an active pose. For me, resting is kind of sprawling out on the couch and reading a book and not activating any of my muscles except my brain. So it was frustrating a bit in the beginning when it was referred to as a resting pose and I felt like I was struggling just to stay up. So I learned to think of it more as a settling pose. I actually have looked up the proper definition, one of the proper definitions of the word settle, and it means to make calmer and to become quieter. That to me is exactly what downward facing dog serves, is to, as you flow and you're moving around and you're active, you come back into downward facing dog. You're still active, but you're settling. So you might find that helpful to think of it like that. I certainly do. And I also would like to really stress the fact that as your strength develops, you will find that the pose becomes a lot more comfortable. So don't give up, don't be discouraged. It's really important to get a good solid base. So whether you're a total beginner, this is great because it'll give you a good breakdown and some alignment tips that really helped me along the way. If you already have a consistent yoga practice, it's actually good to go back to some of these base poses and make sure that you've got it down solidly. So we'll get started. And the first thing we're going to look at is the alignment of our hands and our feet. So we're going to want our hands to be shoulders width apart, and our feet are going to end up being hips distance apart. When you have your hands shoulders distance apart, take a look at the line of your wrist crease, so the line that your wrist forms, and try to keep that parallel to the top of your mat. That way you're going to be sure that your hand isn't kind of crooked or splaying out toward the outside or the inside, but it's nice and centered. And to get the distance between our hands and our feet, the best way that I have learned to do this, because everyone's body is different, you're going to keep your wrists aligned below your shoulders, take a step back, and come into plank. So your heels are directly above your toes and your shoulders above your wrists. And then with your feet hips distance apart here, hands or shoulder distance apart, you're simply going to shift yourself back. And more or less, this is going to give you a good idea of the distance you should have between your hands and your feet. Another thing to keep in mind when your hands are pushing down into the mat is that you want to be grounding down as much into your palms as into your fingers. So technically, if I were to come and try to annoy you while you're practicing yoga and try to pick up your fingers and flip them up, I wouldn't be able to, because you're grounding down so much. It's like you're trying to grab the mat and pull it up. So you're really getting your fingers in there as well. We're going to go back into downward facing dog, looking at the alignment like we just did, and shifting hips up. You can feel a bit that external rotation of your arms. So it's like you can start to feel that separation, that widening between your shoulder blades. Push your hands forward, push your feet back. And there's often the misconception that you need to have your heels on the ground in this position,
which is not the case. That is not the goal at all of downward facing dog. You can root down into your feet. Try to spread your toes wide as well, just like we did with our fingers. And try to push your feet back. So with your hands pushing forward, feet pushing back, it's almost like we want to stretch out our mat and lengthen it a little bit. Now, activating your hands, activating your feet, start to push your tailbone up to the sky. Bend your knees a little bit. And I actually suggest for you to bend your knees, even if you're not used to doing that. It can be quite helpful in helping to elongate your spine. Push your tailbone up to the sky. And then on an inhale, as you're trying to reach up, 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 as you exhale, then you can start to let your heels lower. Feel that nice elongation in the back of your legs and settle in a little bit. So try to feel in, get a good memory of the placement of your hands and feet here. Take a nice deep inhale. And then exhale. And gently come down onto your knees. Sit back onto your heels and
do some wrist circles. This pose brings a lot of weight onto your wrists that you might not be used to for long periods of time. So at any point that you need to take a little bit of a break, come down, take a bit of a break. And that goes for not just here, but in any class that you're doing, any flow that you're doing. Actually, when you're in downward facing dog, it's actually a really ideal spot to come into child's pose if you need to take a bit more of a resting pose. So we're gonna go back. We've got the placement of our hands set up, we got the placement of our feet set up. So let's get back into downward facing dog. And we're gonna bring now more our awareness into our belly. So pull your belly button in, still pushing up with your tailbone. Now think about the space between your armpit and your hip and try to stretch that out a little bit. So you'll feel as you're pushing strongly into the mat, you can lengthen your side body quite a bit. But as you do that, you might find now that your ears are kind of crunched up next to your shoulders. So imagine, I like to use our imagination here. Imagine that you've got a hook on the top of your ear, actually 2 hooks on the top of your 2 ears, both of them obviously, and it is pulling your ears in the direction of your thumbs. But at the same time, you're still trying to find length between your hips and your armpits. So that visual cue always helps me to remember to give a bit of space to my neck. So bringing the top of my ears toward my thumbs. Continuing to rotate externally my arms. And as I bend into my knees, pulling my belly button in, I'm continuing to lift my bum up. So we're just thinking about space. Then if you want to start, like I said before, to work on getting your heels down toward the mat, you're going to feel that nice elongation in the back of your legs. And that's great. You can continue to work on that. So bend your knees a little bit, and then you can work on bringing your heels in the direction of the ground. They don't need to touch, and just feeling into the sensations that that brings. It's really important to keep your core active. You don't want to sag with your belly. You want to keep your belly pulling in, your ribs pulling in, and because it can be quite easy to sag down a bit with your ribs, so make sure you keep pulling them in. And finally, your gaze. You want to keep your gaze between your feet. So there's a tendency to want to look at, you can look at your hands to get your alignment, but don't continue gazing at your hands because you can see how that creates a not very harmonious line in my spine. If I drop my gaze between my feet, that's going to continue that elongation of my spine, and we won't risk hurting or bringing any tension into our neck. So come down onto your knees, take another little break here, and do some wrist circles or just wave your hands around. Okay, so we're gonna go back up one more time, and as we do, we're just gonna walk through every single one of these alignment tips that we've touched on so far, just to do kind of a recap. And then from there, we're gonna do a little bit of breathing as we move in between plank and downward facing dog. So we'll go through the cues to get up into downward facing dog, do a few rolls with our breath, going into plank and then downward dog, and then we'll be done. So we'll start by coming into tabletop and bringing our wrists below our shoulders. Look at the alignment of your wrist and check if the crease is parallel to the top of the mat. Spread your fingers wide and push so much into your palm and your fingertips that it's like your hand is glued down to the mat. Start to bring your feet to the back of the mat, hips distance apart, and from here, shift your hips up, and we're in downward facing dog. Pushing equally into your hands and into your feet, start to try to rotate externally your arms, widen the space between your shoulder blades, pushing strongly into hands and feet. Feel like there's a hook on your tailbone pulling it up toward the sky. Feel the distance that you're creating between your armpit and your hips. Bend your knees slightly, and then start to elongate your heels in the direction of the mat, spreading your toes wide. Pull your belly button in, and it's like you're trying to bring your pubic bone and your sternum closer together, but without creating a curve in your spine. So everything's nice and tight and active. Start to elongate the top of your ears in the direction of your thumbs. Your gaze is between your feet. And your face, we didn't talk about this before, but try not to have an expression of panic on your face. Try to relax everything, and you can even smile a little bit. Now from here, pull your belly button in, take an inhale, come up onto your toes, feel the movement come up through your legs, through your back body, and shift yourself forward until your shoulders are above your wrists. Finally, gazing forward, and then exhale, bend your knees softly and shift yourself back. We're going to do this 2 more times with our breath. So inhaling to come forward, lengthening out of the crown of your head, and then exhale, bend your elbows, bend your knees, and slide your way back into downward facing dog. 1 more time, inhale, coming forward, and exhale, sliding your way back. Pulling in your belly button, pushing evenly into hands and feet, lifting your tailbone up. 1 last inhale into your nose. And exhale everything out. Gently come down onto your knees and come into a seated position. So there we have it. That was a little bit of a breakdown of downward facing dog. I know that there were several different cues, and I don't want you to get overwhelmed thinking that you have to think about every single one every single time. You don't have to tick off a list every time you get into downward facing dog. It's just something that you can build upon. So maybe take 1 or 2 things that you want to work on, like making sure you get the correct alignment, distance between your hands and your feet. And then once that starts to feel automatic, natural, then you can add to that and start to think about lengthening, creating space, shifting your tailbone up. So don't try to do it all at once. You can just take, like I said, 1 tip, 2 tips, add to it, and then start to just feel really nice, steady, and grounded. And as you develop strength, downward dog is like coming home. So thank you so much for joining me today. And if you have any comments, questions, then please leave them below. Or I also left the link to my Facebook, my Instagram. You can contact me there. I would love to hear from you, and I hope that you all have a fabulous day.